God will make a way when there seems to be no way. He works in ways we cannot see. He will make a way for me. He will be my guide, hold me closely by his side. With love and strength for each new day, he will make a way. He will make a way. Thank you. Please be seated. And that's what we're trusting the Lord to do for our lives, to make a way, the way that we should walk, that we would recognize the way God would have us to go in times such as this for your life, and that the Lord would give us the strength to live that way. You'll remember these lines, I'm sure. You will also recognize immediately they are not taken from the Bible. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. And all the king's horses, the king's men, couldn't put Humpty together again. But not only are Humpty Dumptys hard to repair when they fall, relationships can be very difficult to repair when they fall apart. In fact, you may be the victim or have had the experience of a relationship that has just completely fallen apart. And from your perspective, the possibility of repairing that relationship is absolutely impossible. But God can make a way when there seems to be no way. He works in ways we do not see. God can make a way. I don't say that to say that all relationships will be repaired, but all relationships can be repaired. Of course, it takes more than God. It takes not only you and God, it takes the other party too, for there to be peace, harmony, reconciliation, and restoration. But God can make a way. Joseph was the victim. Joseph in the Bible of the book of Genesis, whose life story we've been retelling week after week along this theme, God will make a way. Joseph was the victim of a serious rift in his family. He had no fault or very, very little fault in its making. At the root of it was his father's favoritism towards himself, and it fueled his brother's anger, an anger that grew to hatred. A hatred that grew so strong, they came this close to murdering their brother. But at the last moment, they sold him as a slave instead, hoping never to see, hoping and expecting never to encounter him again. How do you repair a relationship when there is that level of betrayal and that level of abandonment? Well, generally, repairing relationships is not easy, and it is not quick, and it generally is not painless. But God can, and often does, to those who are faithful, make a way. George was blindsided. He never saw it coming. The friends would say of his family that he and his wife were the perfect couple, and with their two charming 2- and 4-year-old kids, that they were the perfect family. Everybody saw George helpful, kind, understanding, patient, forgiving, affectionate, just a fine man. He never saw it coming. He woke up one morning, and usually he rolled in bed, rolled to give his wife a hug, and he was surprised when she wasn't there, but he wasn't alarmed. He got up, he got dressed, he went to the kitchen. He was surprised that his wife wasn't there, but he wasn't alarmed. He went from the kitchen into the sitting room. He wasn't there, but she did leave a note. He wasn't surprised to see the note, but he was alarmed when he read the note. For the note said, "I am sorry, dear, but I do not love you anymore. In truth, I never did love you. I was only pretending. But I have found somebody who I truly love and I dearly love, and I will be in contact." What do you do? What do you say at a time like this? What he did do was call in sick. What he did do was tell the kids something less than the truth. But then they were 2 and they were 4. What he did do was wait and pray and wait and pray for a call, for a message. What he did do was contact everybody he knew who knew them and ask if they had any idea. But nobody had any idea what happened. And there he was, left without explanation. With whom, where, and even to some extent, why. There he was, left to raise these two beautiful children by himself. Time went by, and time went by, and time went by, and it was 6 years later, and there was the knock on the door. He was so glad that he answered it and not one of the children. There she was. After 6 years, there his wife stood. He couldn't find words. He just didn't know what to say. And they looked at each other in stunned silence. She broke the ice. She said, "George, may I please come in?" And George found words then. He said, "No." And after he said no, he said, "Here on the porch." And so on the porch they sat. But then he was at a complete loss for words. He didn't have any words to say. But finally she spoke. And she said, "George, I am very, very sorry how I hurt you and how I hurt the family. And I've had time to think through all of this. I would really like to come back home. What do you think, George?" What do you say at a time like that? Do you turn the other cheek? Do you forgive as Christ forgave you? Do you extend your hand in peace, open your arms in love, and say, "Yes, come"? And call the children and say, "Children, come. We're going to have a great party. Your mother's home. Let's be happy. Let's be glad. Let's celebrate. We'll start over as if nothing happened." Is that what George should do? How do we deal with broken relationships? Joseph had to deal with this. He had not seen his brothers in 20 plus years. The last time he saw them, they were so angry with him, they were ready to kill him right there and then. A divine intervention in the slave caravan, and they sold him as a slave and thought, "Good riddance, we are done with him for good." But they weren't done with him for good. 13 years, that's a long time. 13 years as a slave. But now another 7 years and somewhat more have already passed. And there they are, his brothers on their knees in front of him, begging for bread. Because there's a famine, as we've learned before, that not only gripped Egypt, it gripped the whole region. And where Joseph's brothers and family lived, there was a severe famine, and they were out of food, and they were begging for bread. They had no idea that the person they were asking, the governor of Egypt, was their brother, but he knew who they were. Here's how the story goes as recorded at this stage of his life. I'm reading from Genesis chapter 42 and verse 1. When Jacob, Joseph's father, learned there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you keep looking at each other? Go down to Egypt. I've heard there's grain there. Go down and buy some so that we don't starve to death." Verse 4, but Jacob did not send Benjamin. Jacob had 12 sons by 4 different mothers. One of the mothers was Rachel. She was the favorite of all the mothers, by whom he had 2 sons. He had this serious issue of favoritism towards Joseph, and now this was the youngest, born to the same mother. And when we read verse 4, we read, but Jacob did not send Benjamin because Jacob was afraid that harm might come to him when the brothers arrived in Egypt. Then we read that the brothers arrived, and the text says, and they bowed with their faces to the ground before this brother of theirs who they only knew to be the governor. How should Joseph respond to his brothers? He responds by speaking harshly. For verse 7 says, and Joseph spoke harshly to them and questioned them. And then he makes an accusation and says to them, "You are spies. You've come to see where our land is unprotected. And in verse 10 they say, no, Lord. No, your servants have come to buy food. We are the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men. We are not spies. But then another time, another word, next word out of Joseph's mouth. No, you have come to see where our land is unprotected. And the brothers say, no. We are servants. We are 12 brothers, the sons of one man who lives in Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and the other is no more. A third time. You are spies, and this is how you will be tested. You will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you, go get your brother, bring him here. The rest of you will be kept in prison until he comes, so that your words might be tested, so I know whether or not you are telling the truth. If you are telling the truth, surely as Pharaoh lives, you shall live. But if you are lying, you will die. Harsh words, questions, accusations, and incarceration. Then he throws all of them into prison, but for 3 days. He wasn't turning the other cheek. He wasn't revealing his identity. He wasn't extending his hand in peace or opening his arms in love. But he was in the process of restoring a broken relationship. Why the harsh tones? Why the questions? Why the accusations? Why the imprisonment? Give them a little taste of their own medicine? Give them a pinch of pain for all the grief that he had caused them? Well, you know the answer if you were listening. It was testing, wasn't he? It was testing to see if they were telling the truth. I think he was testing more than whether or not they were telling the truth, though that was an important aspect. Testing their attitude, testing their disposition, testing whether or not their character, testing whether or not their heart has changed. What is their heart to their father? Last time they saw him, they had great animosity and hatred to Dad too for the favoritism towards Joseph. Last time he saw them, he knew their attitude towards him. They wanted him dead and out of the way. He was testing in all of this. After 3 days, Joseph said to them, do this and you will live. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison while you take the grain back to your starving families. But for more grain, you must bring your youngest brother to me, and then your words will be verified, and then you shall not die. His approach was over-rewarded, for they did not know that he could speak their language, because he only spoke to them through an interpreter. And after he said this to them, this is what they said in his presence. Verse 21, the brother said, surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come upon us. Reuben, one of the brothers, replied, didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy, but you wouldn't listen? Now we must give an accounting for his blood. Joseph, hearing this, turned away and began to weep. Should he now reveal his identity? Should he extend his hand in peace, open his arms in love? He doesn't choose to do so yet. He sends them on their way. He gives order to his steward, give all the silver that they came to purchase grain with and put it back in their sacks. Well, Joseph does that not to alarm them, though it is terribly alarming and terribly disconcerting when they think of returning. He does it to make sure what? That they don't stay away because they don't have any money with which to purchase more grain. So they are gone. They are gone until what? Until the grain runs out. Now they face a hard choice. Dare they go back? Dare they go back with silver in their sack? Dare they go back without Benjamin? He was very clear, if you don't bring your younger brother with you. But father doesn't want to relinquish younger brother to the risk. But they finally persuade, and they come with the silver that was in their sack to return it, and more silver to buy more grain, and gifts too. But when they come, they are nervous as cats. They remember the accusation. They have the silver that didn't belong to them. They come and they are more alarmed when they learn that they are directed to the governor's house. There they meet his steward. They immediately confess about the silver. The steward brushes it off. They're treated like royalty. Simeon's released from prison. He's there to meet them. They wash their feet. They feed the donkeys. They throw a feast for them. And Joseph receives Benjamin warmly, grants him a blessing. And then when he serves the meal, he arranges the seating from the youngest to the oldest. Did they ever think, how did he know? Were they ever suspicious about where he got this information? And then when he serves the meal, they all get healthy proportion, but Benjamin, the youngest, gets 5 times more than the rest. When the meal's over, they are dismissed and sent on their way, and they have never felt so much relief in all of their life. On their way home, they've got the grain. Brother Simeon's with them. Benjamin wasn't hard, and their hearts are glad. But Joseph had one more test, and this was the test. He told his steward, he said to the steward, take my cup, my silver cup, the cup I use for divination, and put it in the sack of the youngest brother. And he sent his steward, presumably with soldiers, chasing down the 12 brothers. They catch up with them. When the steward catches up with them, he comes to them and he says this, why do you return evil for good? Why would you do such a wicked thing? One of you has stolen the governor's cup, the cup he uses for divination. And the brothers are confused and they are terrified and they break out in a cold sweat. I mean, they look at each other and they think, they all have the same thought. Which one of us could be so stupid, so boneheaded, so dumb to do such a stupid thing? And the search began. And it began as told by Joseph, start with this one, and gave the birth order and got to Benjamin, the very last. And they found it in his sack. And under armed guard, they were brought back to Egypt. But they weren't brought back to the dungeon. They weren't brought back to where they trade slaves. They were brought back to the governor's house, Joseph's house. Joseph, who is working to rebuild a broken relationship. And Joseph speaks harshly to them. And Joseph says to them, what have you done? Don't you know a man like me can find out these things through divination? Yet no revelation of his identity. And then this is what the brothers say, 44 and 16. What can we say? What can we do to prove our innocence? God has uncovered your servant's guilt. The guilt is not the stolen cup. The guilt is what? Their wrongdoing towards Joseph. And they said, we are all your slaves. We are all your servants, all of us. Joseph said, I would never do such a thing. All of you are free to go. I will only make a slave of the one in whose sack the cup was found. And that's when Judah speaks up. And Judah says, do not be angry with your servant, though you are equal to Pharaoh himself. My father will die of grief if the boy does not return. Please let your servant remain here. I will be your slave. Let the boy return with his brothers. The test was passed. His heart was completely changed. Here he is, ready to sacrifice his freedom, ready to give up his life for the sake of his younger brother and out of genuine concern for his father. Only when Joseph recognizes the extent of the change of character and has passed the test of change of heart, does he reveal his identity? Does he open his arms and express himself of forgiveness to his brothers? But it was a tough job to rebuild this relationship, to relive the dreadful memories, to maintain his composure, to deny himself every desire for revenge, and to maintain patience through this ordeal. Restoration is rarely easy, and it usually isn't quick, and I don't know if it's ever painless. But if we will give ourselves to God's way, there is the possibility of a miracle if the other party will give themselves to God's way. Of course, the whole story is a foreshadowing of our beloved Lord. Jesus was the maker of all creation, the provider, the protector. He is rightfully served. But Jesus entered our world in poverty, and he didn't come to be served. He came to serve. This is the key text in all of the Gospel of Mark, Mark 10:45. For I have come not to be served, but to serve and to give my life a ransom. Who do you pay a ransom for? Those who are enslaved and bound against their will, and to give my life a ransom for many. The price of the ransom, his own shed blood. We don't usually think the cross that looms before us. We don't usually think of the cross as a test for Jesus, but it was a test for Jesus. It was the great temptation of his life, the temptation to avoid the cross and still find a way to save sinners. But to avoid the cross would be a failure to submit to his Father's will, for this was the divine plan. Would his love for us, would his commitment to the Father be strong enough to endure the cross? He passed the test. It's our salvation. But by the cross, all of humanity is tested. There are regions of the world, or there are people who actually defy the cross, despise the cross. But that's not the sin of most of our neighbors. The sin of most of our neighbors when there's a sin against the cross is to treat it with casualness, mostly with indifference and disregard, as if it doesn't matter or doesn't matter much. So long ago, see no connection to their life. There is connection. It's our only hope of salvation. It points the way of caring for others, making sacrifice for others, but also accepting reality that not all others will conform to our desire, just as not all people conform to the way of the Lord. But for those who will give themselves to it, God will make a way when there seems to be no way. He works in ways we cannot see, but have faith. God will make a way. We praise God today for the cross, for what Christ has suffered. We do so in the sharing of the Lord's Supper. To prepare our heart and spirit and to express our gratitude in song, we invite you to take your book of worship again, and now we will turn to the song entitled, Come Share the Lord, for God is giving himself to us, and we have this opportunity to sense again today his wonderful presence with us. It's song number 121. We'll sing one verse before we share in the Lord's table today. Song number 121. I invite you to stand, please, as we worship in song and spirit. Oh, thank you. I was looking at the wrong book. 568. Thank you, Val. Appreciate the correction. Now we will stand. 568. We gather here in Jesus' name. His love is burning in our hearts, His living flame. For though His loving Son, the Father made us one, come take the bread, come drink the wine, come share the Lord.